Elvis Costello watching The Detectives. Vanessa in for Jeremy at 6 minutes past 12, and it seems to have been welcomed with universal and unbridled joy. Whether you flick through today's papers or you earwig a conversation down the pub, you're unlikely to find a single voice attacking the Chancellor for his decision not to increase fuel duty by 3p this August. And for obvious reasons, you might say. The AA believes it'll spare a typical two-car family £76 a year at the pumps. The Conservative MP Sarah Newton, who recently had a nasty fall, could barely contain her excitement at the news.
Mr. Speaker, if I wasn't on crutches, I'd be jumping for joy. The people of Cornwall will really welcome this move, and it proves once more that this government is on the side of hard-working families.
Well, as the economist Galbraith once said, the conventional view serves to protect us from the painful job of thinking. So we've attempted to get the grey matter going, and we found 3 people who believe George Osborne made a big mistake yesterday, though for 3 very different reasons. The Green campaigner Georges Monbiot says it's bad news for the environment. Tim Luckhurst, Professor of Journalism at the University of Kent, believes it was a politically shambolic move, whilst the economist and wealth manager Jonathan Davis argues the freeze will add to our debt and deficit problems and is unfunded. His worries won't have been eased by the Treasury Minister Chloe Smith, who told Jeremy Paxman on Newsnight that it'll be paid for by underspending in government departments, but didn't seem to be able to say which ones.
They fall across and in different ways, and that figure will progress, if you like, through the course of the year.
Just name me a few departments.
No, I won't do that, because we'll be giving you the full details in the autumn
statement. Are you waiting
statement.
to be told that as well?
No, because...
You know, do you? You know which departments have underspent?
It is not possible to give you a full breakdown at this point because the figure is evolving somewhat.
Ouch. Let's start off with Jonathan Davis. Jonathan, you're the economist and wealth manager. Good afternoon to you. Will you please set out your stall? Give me the case. Can you explain why all the celebrations and all the joy should actually be knocked on the head immediately?
Vanessa, it doesn't even get close to solving the underlying problems in our economy. They say that we're talking about £500 million here. Talk about a massive red herring. This government is borrowing more than £120 billion a year. That's on top of the amount of debt that the government says it has of £1,000 billion, and that's not even counting the further £4,000 billion, £4 trillion of debt with regards to the private finance initiative and state underfunded pensions and so on. It is a massive red herring. It's totally populist, and we need to stop this spending and tax reduction. We need to stop bailing out the banks. We need to stop doing basically what Ed Balls and Miliband and Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown want to do, which is basically spend. We're spending more than Ed Balls wants to spend. That is a heck of an achievement.
But in real terms, if Mr. and Mrs. Smith feel they can afford to fill up their car and they can take all the Smith children on a delightful outing and buy them some trainers and give them lunch, that's injecting money into the economy, isn't it? They feel good. It's a feel-good factor type thing, and it means money pumped in.
Yeah, there's lots of feel-good factors, but what it's not doing is actually solving or even getting close to solving the underlying problems in the economy. These politicians, either they say we need growth or we're trying to get growth. The fact is, and your listeners need to get to grips with this, we are the most indebted nation on earth. When you take into account government debt, household debt, bank debt, corporate debt, we have debt in this society of 900% of the economy, of the GDP. You cannot have growth in that situation. So instead of them taking a knife to the cancer, instead they're putting an elastoplast on it. We will remain in 20 years of depression unless we start taking the financial hits.
Jonathan, thank you. I think you need to lie on a chaise longue with a nice damp cloth on your forehead. Let me go, while you calm down, let me go to Georges Monbiot, the journalist, the author, the environmental campaigner. You're telling us, George, instead of being delighted that we don't have to pay an extra 3p, we should be desperately disappointed about this.
Yeah, well, even if it had gone ahead, or even if it had been an extra 30p, petrol still would have been too cheap. When you consider the environmental impacts that it's having. I mean, this is contributing to climate change, which is destroying the conditions of life of some of the poorest people on Earth already, people who live in the Sahel and other places which are already under great climate stress. It's going to cause devastating impacts for the ecosystems all over the world, permanent impacts. You know, we're not going to get the species back, which are going to disappear. We're not going to get the rainforests back if those disappear as a result of climate change. The effects in the Arctic will be permanent. The effects in many parts of the world will not recover from this. And for this sort of one-off gain, where, yes, I can completely understand why people are desperate to see a bit more money staying in their pockets, but we're going to be losing a heck of a lot more than we'll be gaining.
But, George, what about the people who live in the country? Not everyone has easy access to public transport. What if you're stuck in the country and you haven't got much money? You've got your old jalopy, you need to ferry your old mother to hospital or your kids to school. What are you supposed to do if you put the price of petrol up, as you've suggested, by more than 30p a litre?
Well, look, I understand that concern, I really do, and we've had successive governments now which had been promising integrated transport policies, all sorts of ways of getting around which aren't dependent upon burning huge amounts of fossil fuel. And unfortunately, we have had these successive failures of policy. But what Osborne is doing is locking those failures in. He's ensuring that we remain a car-dependent nation, we remain a petrol and diesel-dependent nation, which isn't going to move on into the new technologies, into the less damaging technologies, into the better ways of getting around which don't depend on so many cars on the roads all the time. And so this is a retrograde step in terms of the wider picture, as well as in terms of the immediate effect of making sure that petrol and diesel consumption stay very high.
Though, George, to grasp your conclusion here, are you saying you'd like us to go back to the horse and cart? Is that what you'd like?
I'm not quite sure how that could be seen as a future technology.
Me neither.
There are a huge number of technologies, everything from the electric car to the taxi bus to all sorts of innovative light rail alternatives. I mean, there's so many ways. Transport is not, in principle, a difficult thing to address. There are so many ways of giving us better transport options which actually have a far lower impact on the planet, and also better urban planning, which means we don't have to travel so far in the first place.
George, thank you very much indeed. Let's move swiftly to Tim Luckhurst. Now, we've heard about the economic situation, we've heard about the environmental situation. Tim, you think this has been disastrous politically as well?
Yes, I think that it's revealed that government press management in particular is utterly chaotic. You only need to look at the newspapers this morning to find the Telegraph, traditionally a Conservative supporting newspaper, describing the Chancellor as Lonesome George, and the Times expressing fears for the government's fiscal credibility. I mean, what happened yesterday is that George Osborne panicked. He decided to announce a policy change which he had previously described as unthinkable. He had said that the new fuel duty was essential in order to reduce the deficit. His own Transport Minister, Justine Greening, had defended the increase in fuel duty on Monday in the Daily Telegraph, arguing it was essential to get down the deficit. And then, faced with a campaign both by popular newspapers, including The Sun, and by the Labour Shadow Secretary of State, Ed Balls, George Osborne panicked and decided to reverse his position.
Or you could say he listened. He heard what the people wanted. He bowed to public opinion. He did something that is very wise politically, which is occasionally to listen to the electorate.
I think you're being a little too generous there, Vanessa. In the end, George Osborne has taken out of his deficit reduction plan a sum of money which he's going to have to find from somewhere else. And what was really stark in terms of government communications last night was that Chloe Smith, the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, could not explain to anybody who asked her where that money was going to come from. What do they cut instead? What do people lose from their pockets in order to replace this money that was going to be raised by fuel duty? And the final problem I would suggest to you is I don't think people are even going to really notice this, because it isn't actually a cut in the price of fuel. It's a postponement of an increase in the price of fuel.
Well, the AA says it's £76 £8 a year in your pocket. I think people might well notice that. Thank you very much indeed to Jonathan Davis, George Monbiot and Tim Luckhurst. But the question, of course, is do you agree with them, or are you guardedly celebrating the fact that you're not going to have a 3p per litre petrol price increase? Do let us know how you feel about this. Do you join the gloom and doom mongers, or are you really rather pleased about this? 0500 288 291, or you can email vine@bbc.co.uk.